Half horse, half alligator. Just a touch of snapping turtle. It's all mostly true. I can wade across the mighty Mississippi River, leap over the great Ohio, ride a streak of lightning across the sky. I think I might have scorched the bottom of my britches there. With my weight in wildcats. Just don't ask me to take on all those Herculean feats all at once. They're hard enough to do one at a time. But anyway, as Mr. Daly was mentioning, a lot of these tall tales and folklore started coming out about me not too long before I served in Congress in my first seat in 1827 in the U.S. House of Representatives. And while I was there, I had a Mr. Chilton from Kentucky help me write my own narrative because I wanted to counter against these all tall tales. I want people to know about the true side of Davy Crockett's life story. I called it The Narrative of the Life of Davy Crockett of the State of Tennessee. I wanted people to understand how I rubbed elbows with my own kin, family, neighbors across the area of the wilderness and canebrake area of Tennessee. Well, you know, the story goes like this. I was not born on a mountaintop in Tennessee. Truth is, I was born in a little hamlet area, folks, down along the Nolichucky River off the Limestone Creek. You know, nice little area off along the riverbanks there, the low-lying country there, Tennessee, up into the northeastern sector. As a matter of fact, part of Franklin County, and the truth be known, it was a part of North Carolina at the time. It became part of Tennessee a little later. Well, I grew up, I was the middle child. I was the fifth child of John and Rebecca Crockett. 9 of us. But, you know, people had big families back then to help support one another, take care of daily activities and chores around and all, so people had big families. Well, I grew up as a young'un there for a while, but, you know, I was kind of, in my day, a representative of the common folk, among the common people. I, with my families, moved from the eastern sector of Tennessee all the way to the western sector, during this time known as Manifest Destiny. And folks would refer to things like, "Go west, young man." Well, that was the kind of thing that was going on all across the country at the time, after the Lewis and Clark expedition in the early 1800s. And a lot of people began to migrate that way, wanting to explore the country. Just like my predecessor did, Daniel Boone, who died when I was a young man, and kind of like among our frontier types, I sort of took the torch and carried on with that. But you know, my folks later on, they moved on to a little place called Morristown, a little further westward inside the state, opened up a tavern, kind of like a bed and breakfast of our day. You know, people along the Abington Road heading up to Virginia way on cattle drives and such would stop, and they would bed down for the night and have meals, and that was the meager way that my parents, my mom and dad took care of things to make a living for our family. Well, around about that time, when I was out at a reel, winning some sharpshooting contests for myself, I ran across a little lady by the name of Mary Polly Finley, affectionately referred to as Polly. Well, I got to know her pretty well. She's a nice-looking little gal. And the day before I turned 20, on the last day of my 19th year, we got married, settled down. And I moved down a little bit further south, away from my parents' tavern there in Morristown, to a little place called, my home called Kentucky, there in Beans Creek. Settled down there, and she bore me a couple of nice young strapping young sons. But I got called away about that time when she was pregnant with another child. I had to go off, and there was this massacre that took place at Fort Mims in Alabama. Creek Indian warriors massacred families, women and children down that way. I guess they were getting a little tired of us migrating our way across the country. But anyway, got our dander up, and we knew we had to take care and protect our kinfolk there in the wilds of Tennessee. And so I joined the militia in the army of General Andrew Jackson during the 1813-1814 Creek Indian War campaign. Folks, I learned a lot during that time. Saw the dark side of human nature on both sides of the line, our side and theirs as well. But I came to know, as I came along, they deserve their rights, our Native Americans. After all, weren't they the first ones here in this country? You know, and so I was a little bit embittered about how some of the tactics went in our battlements with them. A terrible one at Tallapoochee, and then also in Talladega. And when my 6-month stint was over, I'd had my fill of warfare. Didn't like too much the way old Andy Jackson took care of our native tribes back then, our sovereign tribes. Because you know, on my trails going through Tennessee, I crossed paths with the Chickasaws and the Choctaws and the Cherokees and some of the more Civil Creek warriors. And you know what I found out? That we all could give each other by and leave. That we could share the game and the land of plenty amongst us all. Well, after I'd had my fill of that, I went on back home after my stint in the Creek Indian War. After seeing what Jackson did to these tribes, you know, he not only conquered them, he took their lands, he took their possessions, he took away their pride. And that stuck with me later, when I entangled with him later, when he became our 7th President of the United States, and I was serving in the House of Representatives for the first couple of terms. But I went on home to Kentucky, there in Beans Creek, and I had another tragedy that befall me. Not long after I got there, I lost the sweetheart of my life, Polly, to a sudden illness. God rest her soul. And she left me with those 2 strapping young boys and a toddler of a young daughter. Now, I wasn't much of being a mother. I could be a father. But I went out hunting, excuse me, ladies, courting for another woman in my life to take care of my kids. Well, I met up with a widow by the name of Elizabeth Patton. She had 2 kids of her own from a man we lost in that battle in Talladega in the Creek Indian War. And we struck up a bargain after a while, and we got married a little bit later on in order to survive. It was a marriage more of convenience. It didn't have quite the spark and the romance that I had with Polly. All right? But Elizabeth stood by my side. She's a hard-edged, frontier Tennessee woman. And between us, we had 3 more of our own. Folks, I found out I was better at multiplying my family than providing for them. I had to live up to my reputation as a hunter at that point because I had 8 of them to take care of now, along with Elizabeth. Good thing I had a pretty good sharp eye on old Betsy here. Well, she stood by my side, helped me through some tough times. And later on, we moved on into the more bottom central part, and I helped found the town of Lawrenceburg. And I learned some things there. I became a justice and a magistrate and a justice of the peace. And I found out that, you know, I didn't have much learning. I only had about 6 months of education. But found out by just striking hands and shaking across the table and writing things on parchment in common horse sense language, people could get along with one another and getting rid of the red tape that was too political in our times. It worked. And I was also elected to the Tennessee State Legislature. Served as an honorary colonel in the Tennessee State Militia after serving in the Creek Indian War. Well, later on we moved on and had a place at the Obion River for a short while, and then later on moved on up to this Rutherford place up above Memphis. And around about that time, after having served in small political positions in Tennessee, I had some constituents come my way and say, "David, why don't you take a stab at running for Congress?" And by the way, folks, that was the name I preferred in my day, David. I always signed all my letters and parchments and things and such with my Justice of the Peace signature, David Crockett. You know, this Davy Crockett came along a little later with these tall tales that came along. Well, I took a stab at it, but in 1825 I wasn't quite well known enough, so I lost that first election. But come the election of 1827, funny thing happened. We had an outbreak. A population explosion of black bear in the wilderness there of Tennessee and in the canebrake area. And in a 7-month period, I took down 105 bear, believe it or not. And people realized that this was a truism about old Davy Crockett and not just folklore. And you know what? It helped catapult me to my first seat in Congress, you know, there in 1827. And I got reelected again in 1829. Now back then, we ran every 2 years for our terms in Congress. And I'll tell you something else. People made you stay on your toes. You needed to know about the Constitution and all the things that were involved in it. People were more wary of us serving them back then. And so I tried my best, did my best to serve the people of Tennessee to the best of my ability. Well, in between, though, my elections in 1827 and 1829, in 1828, here comes Andy by God Jackson, man I served under in the Creek Indian War, becoming our 7th president of the United States. Now, Jackson did some good things. You know, his entanglements with the bank and old Nicholas Biddle, who was trying to credit our settlers off the lands that they had already been tilling and cultivating in our areas of Tennessee and in other areas of the country. I stood not only for Tennessee people, but for settlers all over. Now, you know, they wanted to tax them off the lands, and I fought hard to bring the taxes down so they could remain on their lands. And that's what we stood up for, squatters' rights. Well, I fought through that through my congressional career all the way. But the main thing, folks, that I stood against Andy Jackson for was the Indian Removal Bill of 1830. Later on became the Indian Resettlement Act. Now, I was the only constituent from Tennessee that stood up against this bill. And I said, I will not vote for this bill. My conscience dictated to me not to do so. Well, it cost me my election in 1831 over it, folks, but if I had it all over to do again, I'd have voted my conscience. That's what I was elected to do for the people of Tennessee. But you know what? Another funny thing happened in my favor after that. I came roaring back in the election of 1833 after this play came out called The Lion of the West, starring this Nimrod Wildfire character. And one night, towards the end of my congressional career, I went to see the play when it came to Washington City, and I was dressed in my congressional finery, attended the play, and this fellow for the first time by the name of James Hackett played the part of Nimrod Wildfire when it first came out. He came out on stage. He had on this high, tall, fur-type wildcat hat. Well, later on, folks, that's why I fashioned this little understated coonskin cap that I wore the last 2 or 3 years of my life. Didn't wear it up until then, and only really made it to, you know, help with my speechifying and trying to get elected again later on down the line, you know. And anyway, people expect things, ain't it so? So anyway, this became kind of a trademark for me. But anyway, old James Hackett came out on the stage that night, and he bowed down to me up in the balcony, and he said, "Good evening, Mr. Crockett." And I returned the favor. And I said, "Good evening, Mr. Crockett." Folks, it was at that moment in time, the crowd went into a roar. And I think it was when Davy Crockett of Tennessee saw staring back at him in the mirror, this Davy Crockett fella of tall tales and fancy folklore. Well, you know what? I think I'll stick with that, because my political career didn't do much for me after that. The Andy Jackson regime, his administration, they kind of had enough of me. Truth be known, the Whig Party was courting me for a possible shot at the presidency against this Van Buren fella after Jackson stepped down. And I'll tell you, I love their motto, "We can't do much worse." Wouldn't that be a political slogan for us to adopt in a party today? Yeah. Well, they ran this fella against me by the name of Adam Huntsman, and he was a good fella, Tennessee, and a good man, but he was a manufactured candidate, kind of a yes man to the Jackson administration. But he had a wooden peg leg. And I kind of made sport of it, because I'd say things like, I wouldn't hold this election against him, would you? But anyway, I was kind of a low blow. But I lost that last election in 1835 to Mr. Huntsman. And that's when I'd had my fill of Washington. Turned my back on Jackson's elitist ways. I felt like he didn't support our common folk enough, or our Native Americans. And I rode on horseback on back to the Tennessee State Legislature, and I reported in. And I let them know, and I hope they heard it all the way back in the halls of Congress and our nation's capital. Since y'all have chosen a man of a timbered toe to succeed me, well then, you may all go to hell, and I will go to Texas. And so I did. Came down here with some of my hunting companions and explored the Red River country. And you know what I saw for the first time in my life? Buffalo dotting the range. I'd always hunted black bear and a few grizzlies back in Tennessee, but buffalo, boy, did they fit the expanse and the vistas of this land of Texas. Well, we took only what we needed to survive. Came on down to San Augustine, and I wrote back home to my daughter and son-in-law, the ones who saw me off from from Tennessee, on my way here down to Texas. And I let them know what I'd seen of Texas so far. It is the garden spot of the world. The best land and the best prospects for health I ever saw. And I do believe that it would be a fortune for any man or woman to come down here. There is a world of country to settle here. Well, I signed off the letter. Do not be uneasy about me. I'm among friends. Your affectionate father. Farewell. Little did I know, folks, that would be my last letter home to Tennessee. Dark clouds of discord we were hearing about coming from San Antonio de Behar. This despotic dictatorship under this Santa Anna feller coming in and wanting us to pull up stakes and go back from where we came. Well, I caught up with Captain Harrison's Tennessee Mounted Volunteers on our way in, and 32 of us strong from Tennessee rode on in to San Antonio de Behar. And folks, I couldn't believe it, but when I arrived, the townsfolk there wanted to get a look-see at this old character. Coming all the way down from Tennessee, my sullied reputation, and not too far from the Rio Grande. And understanding the gravity of the situation at hand, I gave him a few words. Fellow citizens of Behar, I am among you. I come to aid you all I can in your noble cause. I shall identify myself with your interests, and all the honor that I desire is that of defending as a high private in common with my fellow citizens the honor and the liberties of our common country. Well, folks, it was at that time I took up in arms Big Jim Bowie over here. You know, he had been down here a little bit ahead of me, sent by General Sam Houston to take down the walls of the Alamo. But Jim and I didn't see much horse sense in that. And Jim had been through his tragedies as well. He'd lost his wife to cholera, Ursula Veramendi, in a prominent family here. But he still had other members of the family there to support and to support him. And so he decided to take a stand. And on parchment he wrote to our Governor Smith that I'd rather die in these ditches than give him up to the enemy. And besides, after the Battle of Behar in December of 35, when we drove General Coss out with his Mexican forces, they left behind 18 to 21 cannon inside the mission walls. It made a lot of sense, even though this old mission was kind of run down and needed to be refortified, to make a stand there because of all this artillery we had. And so Jim and I signed up with Lieutenant Colonel William Barrett Travis, a young 26-year-old buck, and a bit of a hothead, but he was committed, and he had us drawn in with him in this defending this old mission, San Antonio de Valero, now known as the Alamo. Well, folks, you know the story of the Alamo, what we faced, the odds nearly 10 to 1. But tonight, y'all have come in here with a strong life force of your own. But you left the present at the entranceway as you came in. But as you move further into our darkness of our arena tonight, you're going to be blending your presence with our past. And the further you come in, the further you become connected with the past. So walk wary with one another. Walk stealthily. Old Davy's going to move on ahead on the trail. I'm going to see that it's clear, and hopefully I'll find you all inside safely inside the mission walls of the Alamo. I'm going to leave you in the good and capable hands of Mr. Daly. And folks, I'll see you down the trail. Mr. Daly.
Thank you, Colonel Crockett.
You got it, sir.
All right, folks.